Vinales set the third fastest lap of the race. That was their only really positive thing from the race, wasn't it? As you say, Keith, they didn't make the impression that we were all expecting. People were tipping them to sort of push through the field a bit like the Suzukis did. I mean, what Suzukis didn't really get the good start, did they? That they needed from starting that far back. They were back in 8th place, I think, Rins and Mir. So it didn't look good for them. It was a really impressive charge to come through past all those Ducatis, wasn't it? Under those circumstances where you're not gaining on the first lap. But yeah, Aprilia, I mean, Vinales was happy. It was completely different contrasting opinions between the two Aprilia riders. Vinales was happy. He said, look, it was Saturday ruined it for us. If we'd have started better, we had the pace here. Potentially top 3, he thought. Espargaro, on the other hand, I mean, we know he said it's his worst track of the year. He hates the place, doesn't he? Yeah. Do you know what he said? He said, someone said, did you learn anything from this weekend to carry forward? He went, you know what? He said, this is going to sound silly, but I just want to forget this entire weekend. I want to take the bike, forget any changes we made to it, take the bike as it was before we arrived here, and start with that in Portimao. So yeah, I mean, I think that says everything about his weekend. So yeah, Vinales does like the place, so that's, maybe that helped. But so there were signs there, but again, it didn't happen the way that we thought it would, and the way that, certainly in pace terms, they looked like they could have had a much stronger race. Weird season, though, isn't it? These, between all the manufacturers in these opening 4 races, maybe arguably Aprilia is the only one that perhaps has exceeded our expectations. I don't know what you think, Keith. For the start of the season, I think Ducati and Honda, I think we would have expected a bit more from their factory teams. Obviously, Bastianini, fantastic, but the GP22, hasn't won a race yet. Suzuki, they've made a step, but the results haven't really sort of backed up the size of the step, shall we say, that it looks like in terms of the top speed. Yamaha, not really changed. KTM, unfortunately, a bit hit and miss, a bit like last year. I don't know. It's really only Aprilia that have come out of these first 4 rounds is, let's say, a clear step on last year.
And they've still got concessions, which means that step hasn't stopped yet, which is the important part of it, I think. I mean, I'm wishing for Aprilia, because I think that they had such a great weekend in Argentina. You just want that to move on. I mean, you can't afford to have a track you don't like. Aleix Espargaro, you can't afford to have a track you don't like. It's just not allowed. You've got to work your way through it. I mean, Maverick Vinales putting in a fast time. Yeah, great. We've seen that so many times from him, though, haven't we? Late in a race. I mean, a late race pace is great, but you really want to get to the end of the race where everything on your motorcycle and your body has expired. You've used every piece of useful motorcycle or energy, and it's all done with at the end of the race. You don't want to be still able to cruise around at the kind of pace that we've seen Maverick do before. He does have this habit of still having pace at the end of a race, and you think, well, why didn't you use that a bit earlier? Just a critical comment, I suppose. But Aleix Espargaro can't afford to have you can't have one track that you don't work at. You've got to have worked that one out. Seemingly,
well, he was only a few tenths behind his teammate in the end at the checkered flag come the end of the race. But one of the races that Vinales has beaten Espargaro this year, so improvement clearly coming from the other side of the garage too. Overall, you mentioned the Suzukis as well. Rins and Mir fell down initially, clawed their way back. Mir in 4th, Alex Rins in 2nd, and Keith, first podium for Rins this year. I think it was the test rider Sylvain Gintoli saying he walked into the garage at the start of this season and there was just something different about Alex Rins this year. He just seems a lot more focused, a lot more determined. Are you seeing that as well?
I think so. I think that qualifying 3rd row is never going to help matters. I mean, you come up into that bottom gear corner at the top of the hill, and that's going to be a problem. I mean, 2 podiums on the trot now for Rins. He likes Kota, so he's the opposite to Aleix Espargaro. He goes well at Kota. So I think you're allowed to like tracks. You're just not allowed to hate them. As a professional rider, you've got to get on with everything in the entire Grand Prix calendar. He gets on well there. So he's had 2 podiums on the trot now, Argentina and here. It was a good ride, but I think they've still got to sort out their starts and their qualifying. To be on the 3rd row, coming up to that bottom gear corner when it all comes down into that narrow venturi of motorbikes at the top of the hill, it can all go wrong. Your race can finish within 100 yards. If you get caught up in the domino effect up there, which many do, it didn't this time round, but but you can have it taken away from you. Qualifying is very important. I mean, it's and nowadays qualifying starts on a Friday morning. You're qualifying for qualifying. Free practice is no longer free practice. Free practice is to get you through into qualifying 2. You don't want to have to go via qualifying 1 because there's only 2 places that push you forward into the main qualifying session. So, and there are many riders in qualifying 1 who can nick those 2 final places. And the last thing you want to end up on is the 5th row of the grid.
One thing the race did show, Rins, is that they still need to work a bit on stopping the wheelies out of the slow corners. We know that they didn't make the progress with the wings over the winter. It was really the only part of the bike that the developments didn't work as they expected, shall we say. So they've still got that to come. They can still make one update to the wings, but that was where he felt, racing with all the other guys on Sunday, that he was losing a bit, was just the wheeling out the corners. For me, again, he built his pace. We saw in Qatar, he was quite frustrated because he didn't have anything at the end of the race, which was completely unlike what we've seen from Mir and the Suzuki in previous years. We saw it came back in Argentina, and this was again, this happened again on Sunday. So although he hasn't been on the podium yet, and he hasn't won a race since 2020, it's building confidence again for him as well. So he's another one that goes into this European season, believing that they have a pretty solid package in place.
And it's time now for, what did they used to call it? I think it was Julian Ryder used to call it, but I don't know where he got the phrase from. It's the ground war. Once we get rid of these early 4 races that are all fairly unique and not really repeatable as the rest of the year comes on track-wise, we get to the European ground war where the business really starts from now on in. And, the Yamahas will come to the fore. We're going to start seeing, some tracks that suit them a little better as well. So, it ain't all over yet. We've got a long, long way to go.
Oh, the amount of times we say that in every podcast. Long, long way to go. Early days. We'll come back to a bit of MotoGP in a minute. I want to move on to some Moto2 action, if I may be so bold. Tony Arbolino rode a near-perfect race, pushing all the way to the flag for a first Moto2 victory in the Texan sun. Ayagura came home second, and Jake Dixon takes his first Grand Prix podium in third. Keith, I think that's a very happy podium.
I was going to say, for all of us, I don't think you would, would you have denied any of them any places? No, you wouldn't. The 3 that were on the podium, fantastic, great stuff. I'm going to focus on the Brit. Tony Arbolino is a lovely lad, so brilliant for him. I'm happy for him. But Jake Dixon, if you think back to Texas, I don't know how many years ago now, this was the point where he may not have had a Grand Prix career anymore at this particular point. We ended up with, he was replaced after he banged his head, and it looked, everyone was going, well, is Dixon going to be able to continue? Will they drop him? We are now seeing, what Jake Dixon was clearly capable of. It's happening. He's on the podium now. He's a great little rider. He's a great personality. And he is where he should be. It's the time in his career. It's his time. It's time for him to be more on the podium. He and Sam Lowes are right next to each other in the World Championship standings. I can't remember what the actual point situation is. 38 points between Dixon and Celestino Vietti, who leads the championship at the moment. But I think there's only 3 points between Jake Dixon and Sam Lowes at the moment. Lowesy was unlucky getting tangled up in that bloody opening lap, melee. Which just kind of underlines what I said a little bit earlier on. If you end up with a start where you're tangled up with loads of other riders, it can all go completely wrong. Imagine how Somkiat Chantra's feeling about it all as well. He's been having a good run, and that's all ended for him at the Circuit of the Americas. I think Dixon's in a good position, and he should be. I mean, he deserves it. He's worked hard for it, and so podium finish, brilliant.
A lot of setbacks for Jake, haven't there, along the way to get to this point. And I think everyone, as you say, Keith, is so pleased he's suddenly sort of managed to break through and get the result done. He's been looking like he could do it so many times, and things have happened in the races, and he's crashed out or something. So you could see the emotion when he was speaking about it afterwards, what it means to him. So it's going to be really interesting to see now. Now he's got that result under his belt. It's got to be a massive boost for him. And we saw the championship leader crashing out. Canet crashed out as well from the lead, so there was some guys up in the standings that made some big mistakes. Lowes, you say, it wasn't his fault. Chantra's got a long lap penalty for the next race for that incident. So as we keep saying, there's a long way to go, and if Jake is now getting this result and he can build on it, I mean, anything's possible this year for him.
I think
And
anything is possible this year is absolutely the phrase for the rest of the year.
anything is possible. All was possible for Cameron Beaubier, but
Oh.
heartbreak,
Oh.
absolute heartbreak in the final lap, in the last few corners, losing the bike. Off he went, and the top 5 position gone.
Pole
Keith,
position.
heartbreak.
Pole position for Beaubier and the American team. You know, like, honestly, that was... You know what the Americans are like. I mean, you can either like them for it or hate them for it, but they are really behind their guys. You know, and to be starting from pole position at the American Grand Prix, you know, it's a very, very special moment. All the main men are there, Schwantz, Rainey, you know, all at trackside watching on. All these legends are at the track. And to be carrying the flag is a big deal for an American. And, you know, you're right. I mean, the top 5 and the slip out of it on the last lap, you got to feel for Cameron Beaubier. But he's actually, I mean, he's one of the bravest riders in the fact that he could have had a quite a late stage in his career, really. He could have had an easy life in America, earning big money, doing tracks he knows, thrashing the pants off quite good riders. Instead, he gathered it all up and went Grand Prix racing. He bit the bullet. You don't earn, you know, he's not going to earn anything like the money going Moto2 racing as he would be staying in doing, you know, Moto America, Wayne Rainey's series in the States. So it was a big ballsy effort to come out and pitch against people that were, going to be slightly dismissive. And you're going to have to fight for every piece of respect, for every inch of track Cameron Beaubier has had to fight for. And this could have been the pinnacle of all that effort. And in the end, it fell away in the last lap, like you say, 5 corners from the end. I mean, when Cameron Beaubier first came to the tracks, I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be a test. You know, he was a big name already, and he had, you know, presumably a fairly large ego that went with that. And he arrived in the Moto2 paddock, and we've seen a few pretty big names come to the Moto2 paddock and get absolutely their asses handed to them. And I wondered whether Beaubier was going to be the next in line as far as that's concerned. Completely not. That guy deserves to be in World Championship. He's a World Championship contender. And hopefully he will go on from here to continue that momentum in an upwards manner. Shame for him, but how many times has that happened at your home Grand Prix? You know, we've seen it so many times.
A real shame, wasn't it? Not a dry eye in the house on that one. Watching him, I think hands on his helmet, walking towards his bike. It was just, yeah, you couldn't write that. But what was also noted a bit earlier on, Pete, the crash for Pedro Acosta, sliding across the track in the first sector. It's been noted before that, you know, that is not particularly safe, especially when riding in a group. And it was, you know, by some miracle that sliding across the track like that and not being collected by another rider, scary though, and that's going to pose some questions going forward, do you think?
I mean, yeah, as you say, seeing him sliding and the guy, you're just hoping the guys behind miss him, don't you? And it's such a fast section of the track. I mean, what do you do, isn't it? It's a difficult one. What do you do to the track? I know it's a bit like the Silverstone, the Maggots-Beckett's complex, isn't it? Those sort of curves. And, you know, could they put something on the track to stop the riders coming back across? Difficult, isn't it? You know, when you've got people on that trajectory where they're going to continue and rejoin the track in that way, it's, yeah, I mean, thankfully it all worked out. But, and another accident for Acosta, as you say, he's another, you know, he came into this year with so much expectation. I mean, topped that official test in Portimao, so a big race coming up for him. And it's not been the start of the year for him. Aldeguer, another rookie star, he was another one that didn't finish the race on Sunday, of course. So it wasn't, I mean, there was a long DNF list in the Moto2 race. In fairness, a lot of riders sort of crashed out. And Espargaro actually mentioned in the MotoGP race, he said, look, I mean, this shows there's nobody's messing around in MotoGP. There's no bad riders there. You know, look at the track conditions. Look at how many guys fell in the Moto2 race. Look in MotoGP. So it was a difficult day, but yeah, scary moment for Acosta for sure.
Certainly. Well, let's move on to the Moto3 action as well, which was a little later because of the rejigged schedules that happened after the Grand Prix. But experience prevailed, Keith, in the form of Jaume Masia, rode a smart race to claim victory in Moto3. Dennis Foggia came home second, and a bit of a weekend to forget for the likes of Sergio Garcia and Izan Guevara.
Yeah, I think Moto3, it's a funny thing, isn't it, going at the end of the day in the way that they had to. That does throw you right out as a rider. You have a process when you arrive at the track, the time you arrive at the track, what you do during the day, what you eat during the day. Your whole mindset is a completely different thing. It would have been the same for the Moto2 guys to some extent as well. It's, obviously MotoGP stays in that framework of television markets around the world and so on and so forth. The timing of it. So Moto3 being last of the day, there is an argument for saying it should be the last one of the day because it will keep the crowds there, that's for sure, because it's usually the best race of the day. But usual suspects really, isn't it? Is it a Moto3 track? I wonder, with all them great big long straights and all that slipstreaming going on all the time. Masia did what he'd got to do and took the win. I'm just trying to work out if there was anything that really, there's quite big gaps at the head of the Moto3. Foggia now 16 points ahead of Garcia, who slips a bit. Andrea Migno, of course, 17 points back. Migno ended up with that podium. That's pretty handy for him as well. He needed that to keep him in contention. But after that, Jaume Masia, he's still only 6th in the championship, so it's bumped him up a little bit. So he had to put that ride in. He needed those 25 points.
Definitely. I think it was his first win since the start of last year, wasn't it? So it's been a long time coming for Masia there, and he needs to this is what's expected of him, isn't it? If you ride for Aki Ayo's team, it's basically a factory KTM team. People expect you to be at the front and fighting for the championship. So, he's got to show that this wasn't a one-off, if you like. Migno, the old dog, he still sort of made the attempt to win the race, and it ended up costing him second place there. But he's back on the podium. He's obviously had 2 bad races with incidents. So, as you mentioned, Guevara jumped the start. A bit of a nightmare for the Aspar team with Garcia, then crashing out as well. So Foggia, the guy that I guess, the guy we expected to be the man to beat in terms of the championship, he's now up there going into Europe now. He's now in first place with Garcia in second. So yeah, it's Moto3 mayhem, isn't it? Diego Moyera, the rookie, the Brazilian rookie. He was having a good ride in the lead group and just high-sided on the last lap. That was a real shame for him because, impressive guy. Only his 4th race. You've got Migno on about his 140th race or something, and Moyera there just on his 4th race. So one to watch for the future, I think.
Just lastly on the Moto3 point, this time, wasn't it?